thinking about what 10-year-olds do, like play and have fun, we were forced to think about family separation. What if my dad gets picked up? We learned about the city's like hate and angst against the Muslim community, and like I grew up too fast, and so like my coming into office, I've always prioritized and campaigned on ending police surveillance and just like the broader surveillance apparatus. The NYPD will never admit to this, but there are reports. There's tons of reports that, of course, like share the NYPD's violence. But I remember during one of the first hearings I attended as a council member, the counterterrorism chief of the NYPD was before us, and I asked him to apologize, to publicly make a statement and apologize for conducting the Muslim surveillance project. And he, under oath said there was no Muslim surveillance project. And so, the fight, what your question is interesting because there are some issues that like, even if it like gets solved in like a piece or like for one incident, there's still a systemic understanding or status quo that like hasn't been broken. And so, from 10-year-olds to 35 years old, I'm still talking about surveillance. Like it is something that I think right now is actually getting even more egregious with biometric technology, facial recognition tools. So some of my legislation actually focuses on anti-surveillance initiatives.
Okay, so how would you plan on improving immigrants' rights inside of Parksville, like their working rights and just like?
Yeah. So, I'm a proud daughter of Bangladeshi immigrants. I represent Park Slope, and the guys who came before me in this position were from Park Slope. I grew up in Kensington, and Kensington is what we now call Little Bangladesh. And so I've seen the plight of my parents who raised 3 rebel daughters, and we're figuring life out in a place where the resources or the services they needed were not coming from government because they couldn't trust that government had their back. It was coming from community. So I deeply believe that the way in which we care for immigrants it required, you guys want to? No. That didn't happen. That immigrants require community, and so as people have been migrating to New York City, and especially when we experienced the influx in 2022, that there were leaders from those communities who were able to provide them with language access with services that were in their languages, to supporting them if they like took a job as a delivery worker or a food vendor. So the community piece has been very important for me. I also have several pieces of legislation. One that would, if ICE, in our city we have what's called sanctuary policies, and we're considered a sanctuary city. And what that means is that local law enforcement cannot be giving information to ICE to like fast track or expedite the detention and deportation process. But there's been many accounts of somebody in the corrections department or the probation department, the NYPD, slipping in information like, hey, I got somebody, you guys want to take them. And it's been happening because there's no recourse. So I feel that who've been unjustly experiencing this collusion to be able to sue and get their trauma heard, and fight back against a machine that was unjustly trying to deport them. So in the state's budget now, apparently some of what I proposed has been worked on. And so I'm excited to read about that, because at the state level, our state is not a sanctuary state. So if you leave New York City and go into Buffalo, Buffalo is not a sanctuary state. So you're not protected if, like in those cities, the collaboration between ICE and local law enforcement is even more dire, which is why, I feel like New York City has to remain the safest place for all of us. And we shouldn't be the ones saying like, well, they should go somewhere else. Actually, they shouldn't go somewhere else. And in a time when we're also experiencing Trump, tearing apart our civil protections against trans people getting health care, women's reproductive health, and reproductive justice more broadly, families are leaving New York City because they can't afford to live here, but they're leaving to red states because it's cheaper there, but the protections aren't there, the ones that New Yorkers have fought for. And so, it is incumbent on us to make sure that our city is not only safe and that we look out for one another, but that we keep building on that safety.
Okay, and what would that look like? So, like, how would you provide that safety and that sanctuary for these immigrants who are being targeted by ICE and local law enforcement?
So, one is through legislation and being a strong advocate against our previous mayor's in harmful rhetoric against immigrants. Mayor Adams did not speak about immigrants in an inclusive, welcoming way. He often pit immigrants against existing New Yorkers, and oftentimes he would actually pit Black New Yorkers and immigrants against one another. And what that creates is infighting between those two groups, as opposed to us being like, what is the mayor doing? Why, we don't have our fair share because the mayor has disinvested in all of these various services. And so I think the advocacy piece, having leaders who are supportive of immigrants and are speaking out against that kind of divisive rhetoric, is important. The second is Know Your Rights workshops. My team and I, immediately after Trump was inaugurated, we created the Brooklyn Immigrant Support Network, and it's a coalition of the local community organizations, neighborhood or block associations, individual grassroots leaders, and other emerging initiatives to come together and basically assess what is everybody's skill set, where is everybody's strength. So we started doing these Know Your Rights trainings across all of the commercial verticals, going into businesses and informing employers that you don't have to let ICE in for any reason, unless of course there is a judicial warrant that is signed. But oftentimes these guys are coming without a warrant, without any judicial authority. And we created a sign that says employees only as a marker that no one can go into that space. And so many of the businesses around Fifth Avenue have those signs in their stores.
Okay.
I feel very strongly what you're doing. I very much appreciate what you're doing for immigrants, and I'm sure a lot of immigrants that need help will come to you. I would like to get back to our school safety. How would you improve or change the set of, then would it be possible for our school to get more funding?
Would it be possible? Yeah, it would be possible. What are you guys fighting for? What do you guys need?
Funding for our auditorium, because we cannot have a graduation for our senior class, because there's no AC inside of it.
Yeah.
The AC thing is horrible.
Crazy. And the lights were like, they're like pretty messed up. So we had like we had a play and it was like, we had to push it back because the lights were all messed up. And also the bathrooms are like crazy. Like we were speaking on, like they, especially the boys' bathroom. It's like
I feel, yeah, I
really bad.
It's not okay. It's not okay. Well, look, I do support the schools that I represent in the district. I represent a little over 40 of them. And I'm not like the bank that I can, but we have been looking at the schools that, right, like without an auditorium, you can't do performances. It's not just graduation. It's a space that is necessary for your play practices or whatever else. So the multi-purpose use spaces especially have been priority. So I'd love to connect again or right after this. I'm actually not sure what my allocations are looking like for the John Jay Complex, but I have supported some of the other schools in this building.
Commissioner Hall, really?
So, my name is Chloe Champagne.
My name is Katie.
We are with Journalism Club in PSC, the PSC Scholar. And today we'll be interviewing Councilwoman Hanif. Okay, so how would you define effective school safety?
Well, one, thank you so much for having me. I think it's great that you want to hear from your local representative. School safety to me is one where students feel safe, and that to me is free of metal detectors. I truly believe that having the resources that are absolutely necessary, like a librarian, school social worker or guidance counselor, and the teacher to student ratio working efficiently, those all to me amount to safety. I also believe that our schools should have restorative justice either programs or practices, and should be peer-to-peer, so that when somebody pisses you off, they're not just ending up in detention or suspended, they're going to have to understand why what they said was hurtful.
Right.
So more conflict resolution oriented practices.
Yes, here at PSC, we are very focused on making sure we can talk things out. We do have a peer mediator program where it's a bunch of students basically getting trained to help mediate. I'm a peer mediator myself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
You're so too. We're working with a program called C, Students and Educators for Equity, where we have restorative justice teams and stuff. So that's a very important part of the school as well. How would you improve or change the set of school safety policies?
How would I change?
Yeah.
So I've been a part of a year after year campaign that is to remove the amount of school safety officers that are across our high school system, and again, have more of what's missing. Many schools do not have a librarian. Many schools do not have social workers or therapists or even a nurse. I think it's absolutely important that our schools operate at their optimal level, and that can only be done when we've got all of the necessities that a student needs to succeed. I I think having metal detectors, having school safety officers, nothing against them personally, but I think the system has been set up to create a pipeline that is getting detention, suspended, and the pipeline leading to prison. And I think that effect is something that school leaders should be aware of, and we shouldn't always think to get students punished. I think like the punishment or disciplining that requires students to take a leave, I don't think that helps. I don't think that makes anyone safe. I think that actually isolates the individual who's made a choice that wasn't okay, and that isolation leads to other negative impacts. And so I think that our schools need to be fully robust, and we don't have, again, like music and arts classes are usually the first to get chopped when the budget is not balanced. And I think that that's dangerous. Like, why are we removing music and arts?
Yeah, I agree. I think they're very important to have, especially since it's a way to like express yourself in a way. So I 100% agree. Do you think, like, you mentioned the funding, like once the funding goes down, so do these programs. How would it be possible, like what are ways to get more funding for our school and these activities?
That's a great question. So the city's budget fight is happening right now as we speak. We're gonna approve or disapprove a budget at the end of June. And for the last 6 months or so, I've been a part of various education campaigns to fully either restore arts and music classes, or guarantee a nurse, or make it so that after-school programming is available, and that has been a priority of mine. Fighting for equitable schools and budgets that really deliver what students need to thrive has been a priority that I am fighting for annually, and it's not been enough. I mean, the first year I got elected, the administration, mayor, had cut tons of money from the Department of Education, so from public schools. Now, when you take money away from public schools, that gives the charters and private schools encouragement. They feel empowered to then expand their footprint. And in the last administration, the narrative around public schools was that we didn't have enough students enrolling, and that was completely false. And they really pushed an effort to privatize. And so we had to fight back against Mayor Adams's big campaign to privatize schools and take money away from public schools. And that is not what I stand for at all. I think that education, especially because students are spending, obviously 5 days, but some of you all are here on the weekends too for theater or whatever else, sports. You are spending all of your life in a building that needs strong working infrastructure. Some of my budget that I'm about to allocate are going towards fixing bathrooms. And I just find it deplorable that the Department of Education or just our city at large doesn't just say, oh, look, we've got 50 broken sinks and bathrooms that don't work, let's fix that first. That leads to health hazards, right? Like, you can end up having an autoimmune condition. We are also seeing, with the rainstorms that are happening, that they are so heavy, they're flooding school buildings. And the school buildings, certainly are not appropriately able to take in just a few inches of that water, and students have been pushed to, you know, finish their classwork or have to pay attention while they're experiencing this like traumatic and like, I would be anxious if I was in a room where it's flooded and like I'm expected to learn something, or even for the teacher. Many of our lunchroom, the cooks and the lunch ladies, they spend a lot of time in the kitchen that often gets like sweltering hot. And so like the issue around the climate piece is also one that I think is incredibly important. And been a part of a campaign called Clean Healthy Schools that is pushing that piece forward, because we need our schools to be places where we can breathe and not get asthma or an autoimmune condition.
Do you think the way that public schools are set up, do you think that had an effect on why you wanted to become a councilwoman? And just like, why did you?
Absolutely. So I went to Brooklyn College. So I hope you all are thinking about CUNY as where you ended up. I certainly was inspired during my undergraduate years. So I was diagnosed with lupus at 17 as I was like heading into senior year of high school. And when I got diagnosed, I experienced a myriad of obstacles. My parents didn't speak English. I didn't have health insurance, and we had never navigated what is a very convoluted, complex healthcare system in our city. On top of our inaccessible trains and buses, and also for just I was very young. Like nobody's thinking about illnesses or like chronic illness, and feeling really like, oh, like no one's gonna understand me, or like I don't know if I can get through this. And so I also didn't know if I was gonna go to college. So I was able to get into Brooklyn College with a lot of support from my friends during the application process. And during undergrad, I underwent several invasive surgeries. Both of my hips are replaced, and I've had to, you know, really work up to graduation. I was not a 4-year student. I did more than 4 years, and just the experience of being a young person with an illness that like doesn't have a ton of research, and also what the research indicates is that Black and brown women are more likely to have it. At the time, there was no one medication that could treat lupus. And so I found all sorts of things that really mess with my self-esteem and confidence. However, at Brooklyn College, you know, I became friends with the folks at the Women's Center. I became very active within issues related to just women's rights and like feminist politics. And by the end of the 5 years, I finally declared women's and gender studies as my major. I went in thinking maybe I'm going to try the medical field, and I was just like, it was killing me. Like the books were so heavy. I was not in remission, which is what I am right now. So the campus was grounds for that kind of activism, and I got to see and learn. I got to learn about Palestinians' fight for self-determination. Like that was where I joined the Students for Justice in Palestine. It was also the site where I joined a Muslim Student Association, and at the time, it had been uncovered through an investigation that an informant was hopping around the community schools to prey on vulnerable Muslims and ID them and take them in. And so that was shocking to all of us when we learned that, because I grew up post 9/11, and that experience of being Muslim has always meant that somebody's surveilling us. And so to find out that someone joined the MSA, acted like a Muslim, and befriended us, and ended up being a police informant was just really, it was scary. Like, that made all of us feel so unsafe. And we were able to take those concerns to the administration. I also ended up leading several clubs. I was the president of the Desi Cultural Club, and it used to be that the Desi Cultural Club was like just a fun heritage, like celebrating the Wali and Eid and throwing parties. And during my time, I had brought the focus more into issues that are affecting the South Asian community at large, and domestic violence is one of them. And so I had we'd invite guests to speak on these issues, and Saki for South Asian Survivors is one of them. And that conversation, like, I will always remember, because so many of us who were at school were dealing with the violence or the harm that was being described, and so to destigmatize these conversations. So certainly